ever get that feeling? You know, you're about to do something big, maybe something outside your comfort zone, and suddenly your heart decides it's a drummer in a rock band.
Oh, absolutely. I know that feeling well.
It's like instant butterflies, right?
Yeah.
And it got me thinking about how we all experience fear, but we don't always face it head on.
That's so true. And that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Yeah.
How faith can be that source of strength when fear comes knocking.
Exactly. We're taking a deep dive into a conversation between two podcast hosts about this very thing, and their insights were honestly spot on.
Oh, definitely. One thing that struck me was how they emphasized just acknowledging fear, not trying to brush it under the rug.
Yes. They were saying how there's this pressure sometimes to act tough, like fear's not even a thing.
Right, like we should just power through. But these hosts, they were real about it. They were like, nope, it's okay to admit when we're afraid.
I loved that because it's so true. And you know what verse they brought up that I thought was perfect for this?
Let me guess. It's the one from 2 Timothy, right?
You got it. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind.
Such a powerful verse.
It really makes you stop and think, you know? Because if we really believe that God hasn't given us a spirit of fear, then why do we let fear have so much control?
It's almost like we forget sometimes, you know?
Yeah.
We forget who we are in Christ, forget about the power and love and sound mind that are available to us. And fear swoops in and tries to take over.
And it's like that verse is a good reminder. It's like, hey, remember who you are, remember whose you are. And speaking of remembering, they also told this story about Joshua.
Oh, yeah, leading the Israelites into the promised land.
Exactly. Talk about a daunting task. I mean, can you imagine leading a whole group of people into a land they've never seen before?
I'd be terrified.
Right. And the message God gives him is so good. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Joshua 1.9.
Just hearing that verse again.
Mm-hmm.
Powerful.
I know. And it really resonated with me because it shows that God isn't asking us to be fearless. He's asking us to trust him, even in the midst of our fears. But how do we actually apply that to our lives? You know, when we're facing down a challenge or a decision, and fear is making us want to just stay hidden, stay small.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's one thing to hear that message, to read those words, but it's another thing entirely to actually live it out.
Exactly. And these hosts, they had some really insightful thoughts on how to do just that, how to actually put that message into practice. But before we get into the how-to, let's talk about what it actually looks like to choose faith over fear when it feels impossible. Because sometimes those feelings are just so real, you know?
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes the fear is a whisper, and sometimes it's practically shouting in your ear.
It's like you know you should do the thing, you know you should step out in faith, but then that fear just grabs you and whispers all the what ifs. What if you fail? What if you look silly? What if you get hurt?
And it can be paralyzing, right? Like
Yeah.
all the logic and reason in the world can't seem to quiet those what ifs.
Exactly. So how do we move forward when we feel stuck in that space? When fear feels so big and faith feels so small?
Well, it goes back to that Joshua story, right?
Hmm.
God didn't say, don't worry, you won't be afraid.
It was more like, I'm with you even when you are.
Exactly. And that's where faith comes in. It's not about the absence of fear. It's about trusting God in the midst of it.
It's like that saying, courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. So good. And these hosts we're talking about, they had this idea about turning fear into, get this, fuel.
Oh, yeah, I loved that part. It's like, don't just ignore the fear. Don't pretend it's not there. Use it.
Like a springboard
Yeah.
to propel you forward.
Yes. And one way they talked about doing that was by reflecting on God's faithfulness in the past.
Oh, that is so key. Like when you're facing a new challenge and the what ifs start swirling,
Yeah.
you can hit pause and remember those times when you were afraid and God came through.
It's like building this evidence file, right?
Oh.
Of God's faithfulness in our lives.
Exactly. And you know what they suggested? Journaling. Like actually writing down those experiences.
Oh, I'm a big fan of journaling.
Hmm.
I'm not always great at keeping it up consistently,
Yeah,
but when I do, it's amazing.
right. It's like those times when you actually make the effort to write it down, it just makes it more real somehow. And it doesn't have to be super complicated either.
Nope. Just jotting down a quick note about how you saw God move or how you felt his presence. It could be so powerful. And you know what else they mentioned? Creating visual reminders.
Or yeah, not just writing it down, but like making something.
Exactly. Like a drawing or even just gathering a few objects that have special meaning.
It's like creating these tangible reminders of God's faithfulness. And I love that idea because sometimes we need that, right? We need something we can actually see and touch to remind us that we're not alone, that God's got this.
Absolutely. Especially when doubt and fear are trying to pull us under. It's like having an anchor.
I love that analogy. It's like, okay, fear, you can try to drag me down, but I'm holding on to this anchor. I'm holding on to faith.
Yeah.
It's like having those little nudges, those reminders that, hey, remember that time when, yeah, God was there then and he's here now too.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes these conversations so helpful. It's like we can talk about faith and fear in a general sense, but when we get practical, when we start talking about actual things we can do to strengthen our faith, that's where the rubber meets the road.
100%. Because it's a journey, right? It's not like we have one conversation about fear and then we're good to go.
Right. It's something we have to keep coming back to, keep learning about.
It's like building a muscle. The more we use it, the stronger it gets.
Totally.
Yeah.
Every time we choose faith over fear, it's like we're giving that muscle a workout.
Exactly. And it all comes down to this, doesn't it? Recognizing that fear is normal, it's human, but we don't have to let it control us.
We always have a choice. We can let fear call the shots, or we can choose to hold on to faith.
Even when our faith feels shaky, right? Like sometimes it's not this big, bold thing. Sometimes it's just this quiet whisper in the back of your mind saying, keep going, I'm here.
Absolutely. And choosing to listen to that whisper. That's what makes all the difference.
This has been such a great deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from understanding the nature of fear to learning how to actually live out our faith when those fears start to creep in. And the best part, we've got a whole toolkit of practical strategies to help us along the way.
And it all circles back to this. It's not about being fearless. It's about who we choose to cling to when we are afraid.
So good. And on that note, I want to leave you with one last thought. If fear is a signal, if it's highlighting something that truly matters to you, how can you let that knowledge, that awareness, guide you toward a deeper, stronger faith? Something to think about as you continue on your journey. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone.